topic, and that is mortal sin. So to define mortal sin, it's a serious disobedience to a law of God. So, the difference between mortal and venial sin. Mortal sin must have serious matter to begin with, and then it must have deliberation, and must have full consent of the will. So sufficient deliberation, full consent of the will. I think we talked about that. St. John Chrysostom said, it is to abandon the will to the devil. And he also said it's a voluntary insanity. Sin is a complete degradation of man. It is his supreme misery. And it is the highest evil of man, since it is absolutely opposed to the supreme good. So he is meant to see God. He is brought into the world in order to merit and to, through the gift of sanctifying grace and actual graces, to merit his salvation. The purpose of his existence is to see God. The original parents were supposed to see God after a certain time on this earth. So this earth is really a proving ground. It is a race, that you run, and you have to finish well. It is not a place on which we're meant to spend an eternity. Our souls are immortal, and that can even be proven by reason. And so we have a desire to live forever, and that's not merely a desire for survival that the animals have, but we have this desire to live forever because our souls, our intellects, are able to know things that are immaterial. And immaterial things do not corrupt. And so what makes us happy really is immaterial things such as truth, love, justice. So things that are totally immaterial. Justice is an immaterial thing. There are just acts. There are acts that pertain to love, but in itself, it's an immaterial thing that proceeds from an immaterial thing. See, so because of that interest that we have in immaterial things, for example, art. So you don't see animals walking through museums, architecture, things like that. Balance, order, music, all of those things are immaterial. They have material expressions, but they are immaterial principles. And so we are meant for a life in which our intellects and wills are enthralled with God in heaven. So that's the purpose. So the mortal sin is just the worst possible thing that can happen to you. Because of that, it thwarts everything that you're made for. It would be like taking a car and purposely driving it into a brick wall and smashing it to pieces. A beautiful car, $100,000 more, smashing it. First day out of the showroom, smash it, purposely. It's an insanity. See? St. Augustine said, sin is not a being, it is nothing. And the reason it is nothing is that it is a privation of a good that is due. In other words, D-U-E. I always use the example of, those little gatherings after Mass, there are donuts. Well, let's say a child goes up and takes a chunk out of the donut and puts it back. That's a bad donut. Not because the rest of it is good, but because it is missing something that pertains to its integrity. So it's bad. So the same thing is true about sin. It is an absence of something that ought to be there. Sin is called the negation of being, which we just said, because in itself it is something vile and of no value. What good is a smashed car? Because the pleasure of sin passes quickly and vanishes. So, but then the sin is always with you. And even after it's forgiven through contrition and confession, it's still always with you. In that sense, it doesn't really ever get erased from your memory. Because sin brings him who commits it to a kind of nothing that is a present and eternal death. So your soul is dead in the sense that while it still maintains the functions of the body, it is dead with regard to its supernatural functions, and therefore is incapable of merit. It is incapable of proceeding toward the end that God has set for it. And so it's, in that sense, like a car that has broken down. It's not going where it should go. It's just there. The car is a neutral. Yes, you can still see and hear, and all the functions of the soul in that sense are working, but the ultimate goal of the soul escapes you. You can't even move. You're paralyzed because of mortal sin. It is also nothing because from the point of view of virtue and the moral good. So it completely destroys supernatural virtue. You might still retain some natural virtues. It destroys supernatural virtue and the moral good. Unless you are pitted against God, you're morally evil and rotten. It is nothing, or the negation of being, because it's the privation of good, but a privation is something negative and not a positive being, like the bite out of the donut. And mortal sin separates man from God, who is subsistent being, the creator of all things, without whom nothing was made and nothing would live. So it separates you from God. So that's the worst possible disaster that could ever happen to you. St. Augustine said, sin is the cause of all of our evils. Now, if anyone should know that, it's St. Augustine, because he was a sinner for a long time. St. Ambrose said, the dead man is preferable to the living man because he has stopped sinning. He who is not born is preferable to the dead man because he has never sinned. So when you commit a mortal sin, you become a useless creature in creation. You become something that is like a piece of trash. Adam committed 8 sins. He committed the sin of pride by preferring to be his own master instead of being submitted to God. Ye shall be like gods, having the knowledge of good and evil. You decide what is good, and you decide what's evil. So you're your own master. He committed the sin of being excessively enamored with his wife, who proposed to him the forbidden fruit. So she's the one that was talking to the devil. St. Francis de Sales said, it is the fault of women that they try to manipulate men, and it is the fault of men that they let them. Francis de Sales. And that was the original sin, that he let himself be influenced by his wife, who was curiously talking to the devil. He did not want to displease his wife. No, dear, we shouldn't do that. See? It was also, number 3, a sin of curiosity. See, why doesn't God want us to eat that? It looks good. It probably was good. But see, that was, as St. Augustine points out, a pure obedience, because precisely it wasn't some ugly, stinking fruit or something, or rotten. It was quite nice. It was pure obedience because it made no sense. See, if I say God doesn't want you to steal, well, that makes sense. We shouldn't steal. But if God says, I don't want you to open this drawer, well, why not? See, that's curiosity. What's in that drawer? You open it up, there's nothing in it. But you have sinned against the command of pure obedience because it didn't make sense in that. There was nothing natural about it that would have told you that this is something wrong or it's going to poison you or something. So curiosity. He sinned by incredulity, by by disbelieving what was told to him by the Creator. So a lack of faith. He should have said, we are told not to eat of this, but he didn't believe it. He sinned by presumption, by considering the command to avoid the fruit as a light command. You know, what's a little fruit? So, he sinned by gluttony, and that is, remember that the fruit appeared beautiful, and so eating something that he should not have eaten. He sinned by disobedience, obviously, because they were told not to eat it. And he sinned by offering an excuse instead of contrition. He blamed it on his wife. And she said, well, the devil told me. See, so instead of being contrite, they offered an excuse. See, and these are the only sins that Adam was capable of. He could not have, neither of them could have committed a sin of sensuality because they had the preternatural gifts, which meant they could turn on sensuality or not, the way you would turn on a light, an on and off switch. They had complete control over that. So it was nothing like that. This was a purely intellectual sin, but sinning in all of those ways. Now, mortal sin is a type of idolatry in the sense that it replaces God with some creature. It could be anything. It could be your laziness. It could be neglect. Don't forget sins of omission when you do your examination of conscience. Not only the things you did, but the things that you didn't do. And sometimes that could be serious. So the miser adores gold and silver. The impure man adores the flesh. The drunk adores alcohol. So you put something in God's place. You pull him off the throne and you put something else there, some creature there. St. Augustine said, every time we sin by thought, by speech, or by action, we destroy the temple of God and we injure him who abides in us. So remember that St. Paul said you are temples of the Holy Ghost. The sanctifying grace is a participation in the life of God. And that's what is destroyed. So we throw God out, if you want. It's a terrible thing. We expel him. It is like preferring Barabbas to Christ. Give us Barabbas. St. John Chrysostom said, the sinner kills God, at least by desire. He wishes that God were not there. The law of God is a burden to him. So in that sense, he kills God. He would just wish that he were not around. St. Thomas Aquinas said, sin is the annihilation of God. Referring to mortal sin here. I'm talking about that. The sinner cannot annihilate God in his essence, nor can he annihilate him in heaven, nor can he annihilate him in his works, his creation, but he does annihilate him in his heart. The sinner would prefer that there were no God, because he wants to no law which he must obey, nor justice to punish him. God is a burden, a pain. Thus the love of sin carries with it the annihilation of God. If our Lord appeared again on earth, the sinners would have him endure a second passion. They would do away with him. They would crucify him again. St. Paul says in Hebrews concerning sinners, crucifying again to themselves the Son of God and making him a mockery. That's Hebrews 6, verse 6. Crucifying again to themselves the Son of God and making him a mockery. Mortal sin is the unique cause of the death of Jesus Christ. He would not have come for venial sin, because it doesn't destroy the life of grace. If the wound which sin inflicted on the soul was not mortal, and mortal for eternity, never would have the Son of God died in order to remedy it. So if there were only a question of venial sins, he would not have had to go through his passion in order to make up for that. That's the gravity of mortal sin. It requires the death of the Son of God in order to remedy it. But people commit mortal sins without even thinking about it. Every single day. I mean, the whole day is full of mortal sins of one kind or another. The malice of only one mortal sin is so great and is such an outrage against the divine majesty that all the prayers, humiliations, austerities, praises, and adorations of the saints and of the angels would be incapable of expiating a single mortal sin. All of that put together, the life of the Virgin Mary, all the saints, everybody, the angels of heaven, all of those virtues and good works, etc., could not expiate a single mortal sin. In order to do the perfect act of expiation, it required an act which was, by its very nature, infinite, and that is that God die on the cross. Not that he obviously didn't die in his divine nature, but see, that's known as the communication of idioms, that you can say, it's not a heresy to say God died on the cross, if you understand. What you can say about either nature applies in both ways. In other words, you could say, but he died according to his human nature, obviously. But it had an infinite effect because he is God. See, so mortal sin is by its nature infinite in the sense that it is a death-dealing and permanent, and it had to be overcome by death as a perfect way. In other words, God could have just said, well, I forgive the human race. He could have, but God wanted to do it perfectly by an expiation. By its very nature, mortal sin is an irreparable evil. So, by its very nature. So when we commit a mortal sin, we inflict death upon our soul. So just as death is irreparable, the death of the soul, that is, its capability of positing acts which pertain to its ultimate end, is finished. In that sense, it's morally dead. And although God can raise us up, nonetheless, for as long as sin is in us, we are assured of having the effects of sin in us and the sentence of eternal damnation. So you could compare it, as I've used many times. I always use the same analogies because they're very good. falling into the bottom of a dry well. You're not getting out unless somebody throws you the rope. So in itself, the damage is irreparable. You're going to starve to death down there. You'll be a skeleton in a few weeks, eaten by bugs and whatnot. It's irreparable. You can't do anything for yourself without the grace of God. The grace of God, you must be drawn by the grace of God to come back from mortal sin. You can't do it on your own. And St. Alphonsus says God only tolerates a certain amount of mortal sins in people. And then he stops giving his graces. That's what St. Alphonsus. There's a certain limit. And then that's it. You die in your sins, and that's the end. He who only once renounces God renounces him forever. So in principle, it is a total separation from God that is irreparable. Because it is the nature of sin to make eternal, as much as it can, our separation from God. It's for the very nature of it. It is turning your back on God by its very nature. The only way that it can be remitted is by the grace of Christ that was won by his redemption. It's the only way. All the actual graces are from the cross. No man desires to see the end of his happiness, but the sinner places his happiness in sin. St. Gregory the Great said, sinners, if they could, would like to live forever in order to sin forever. And that's true. They would like to go on sinning. They wish they could live forever to have all of their sins. He continues, they show that this is their disposition by never ceasing to sin for as long as they live. Let them not say then, why is hell forever? As they often do. It pertains to the justice of the Supreme Judge to never bring to an end the torture of those who in this life never wanted to be without sin. So just as they would sin forever if they had the opportunity, so hell is forever. So we're talking about mortal sin. And anytime we say sin here, we mean mortal sin, because venial sin does not, it's not that it doesn't count, it's just that it doesn't have the same effect as mortal sin. So, but venial sins lead to mortal sins, deliberate venial sins. That means where you're content with a habit of venial sin, that leads to mortal sin, okay, because you become complacent with sin. See, so the little leads to a lot. It's just like somebody becomes an alcoholic by drinking a little bit too much here and there, and then finally they become addicted. So sin is worse than death, and it's worse than reprobation, and worse than hell, because sin is in itself a stain and evil, while death, reprobation, and hell are merely the punishment for sin. So all of those things are the result of sin, so sin is actually worse than they are, because it is the cause. The cause always has the effect eminently in itself. See, fire will warm you. The fire in the furnace will warm the rest of the house, but if you put your hand in the fire itself, which is the cause of the heat in the house, you are going to be very unpleasant or have a very unpleasant experience, because the cause is eminently in the effect. In other words, it contains the effect in a more perfect way, you might say. So that's why sin is actually worse than all of those things. Hell is not an evil in itself, because it's a just punishment for the sinner. Just like a prison. People delight when a convicted criminal goes to prison. They think, well, good, that's what he deserves. And the prison is there as an instrument of punishment. And people are sad if he just walks. You see? So hell is there for the glory of God. It manifests the justice of God. And, you'd be surprised, but you say, what if my relatives or friends go to hell? You will love God so much in heaven by the beatific vision that you will rejoice that they're in hell because they deserve what they got. I should say they got what they deserve. In other words, that you will not, your love will be transformed, you might say, entirely to love of God, and that what you will see that the mercies that God gave them, and how they rejected those mercies, and that they actually should be in hell. See? And that's hard for people to understand. People are shocked by that, but that is true. In other words, just as you rejoice that a criminal goes to prison. Yeah. All right. So the true evil is that which leads to sin. That which leads to hell, which is sin. So, sin is the source of hell. St. Anselm said, if I saw on one side mortal sin and on the other side hell, and if I had to choose one or the other, I would prefer to throw myself into hell rather than to commit a mortal sin. In Ecclesiasticus, it says, flee from sins as from the face of a serpent, for if thou comest near them, they will take hold of thee. The teeth thereof are the teeth of a lion, killing the souls of men. And St. Bernard of Clairvaux said, when the soul sins mortally, the soul which is the companion of the saints and angels, and which is the spouse of Jesus Christ, throws itself into a sewer. It lives among impure animals and venomous reptiles. It wallows in filth and eats it. Leave it to St. Bernard to be very explicit. Don't forget, when you're baptized, you have baptismal innocence. See? And the idea is that you preserve that your whole life. And this is what happens when you don't preserve it. In other words, you go into a sewer and you eat filth. That's what you do to your soul. So now confession exists precisely it's a sort of extension of baptism in the sense that it relieves sins or remits sins that are committed after baptism. But the ideal is to retain your baptismal innocence. It can be done, but what is practically necessary for that is that you are raised by very pious parents who do all the right things. And many times, especially given the world in which we live, even ordinarily pious parents would not have the same ability to preserve a child from mortal sin, any kind of dangers of mortal sin, etc. The confessor of St. Thomas Aquinas said that in his opinion, St. Thomas never committed a mortal sin in his whole life. So it's a beautiful thing. St. Augustine said, God imposed a law upon sin in such a way that what gave pleasure to the sinner becomes, in the hands of God, an instrument of punishment. The Book of Wisdom says, but for the foolish devices of their iniquity, because some, being deceived, worshipped dumb serpents and worthless beasts, thou didst send upon them a multitude of dumb beasts for vengeance. He's talking about Egypt. And there he's talking about the locusts. That they might know that by what things a man sinneth, by the same also he is tormented. It's the Book of Wisdom. So that refers to the plagues of Egypt. St. Augustine said, "You have ordained, O Lord, and so it is, that every disordered mind is to itself a punishment." That's true of mortal sin. We'll talk about that slightly later. The remorse of conscience. Not all of the gold in the world can buy you, for you, the testimony of a good conscience. All of it. Trillions of dollars, all of Elon Musk's money, cannot buy you the testimony of a good conscience. When you commit a sin, your conscience is constantly accusing you. And you carry that with you, even after remission of sin, you carry that with you your whole life. The remorse and the biting of conscience. And St. Thomas, as you may recall, says that God permits us to fall into sins of impurity in order to humiliate us. So that conscience is constantly humiliating you. In other words, you are not what you think you are. So that you have offended God seriously, and that you are weak, and so there's a constant reminder of humility there. So that's what St. Thomas says. But that can also, in other words, sins can, once they're remitted, can have an indirect good effect in the sense that it makes the priest more compassionate to sinners. In other words, if he's an angel sitting in the confessional and somebody confesses terrible sins, there's a possibility he might be indignant, or how could you do such a thing, or something like that. Whereas indirectly, the fact that he may have sinned himself earlier in life, like Saint Augustine, or I think Saint Gerard Magella, I think that's another case of that. Probably Saint Ignatius, I don't know. He was a soldier, so usually soldiers, are not saints. And he had a great conversion after his but there are others. Some, never, like Saint Aloysius Gonzaga was completely innocent. But that it gives compassion of the priest to the sinner in the confessional. So that doesn't mean you should go out and go sin. It doesn't mean that. But in other words, it's not necessarily something that would impede you. That's what I mean. And it could be permitted by God for that purpose. God never permits an evil except for a greater good. It's a general principle. He could not. In other words, that's against his wisdom to permit an evil that would not in some way turn to a greater good. So, St. John Chrysostom says, "From the source of sin derives the wound of punishment." St. Paulinus of Nola said, "He who commits sin from the grain of his life grinds a hostile wheat, with the result that the devil feeds on it, for whom the soul becomes his bread, for which he is hungry." The book of Tobias says, "But they that commit sin and iniquity are enemies of their own soul." St. Gregory the Great said, "The sinner loses a happy life by means of vice itself, or by the punishments which are attached to the vice." So vice never makes you happy. You are happy when you have peace in your soul, and when that is achieved by being on good terms with God, which is through sanctifying grace. If you are set on mortal sin, you have to go from sin to sin to sin, with not with happiness, but with a constant thirst for something else that is going to entertain you in a sinful manner. St. John Damascene said, "Sin is the death of the immortal soul. St. Thomas says, sin is vanity, one, because to choose it is to choose something unreal. Remember the bite out of the donut. Sin is a privation. So you're attaching yourself to something that is really air in a way. In other words, it's a privation. It's not something real. It is in a way fantastic or unreal. It's a privation. It's in that sense nothing, just as the bite out of the donut is nothing. It's a bite. So you're attaching yourself to that. Two, he says, because it is transitory. See, it's vanity, vanity in the sense of it's something stupid. It's like Saint Solomon said, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, in the sense that the things of the earth are passing and they do not last long. One of the essential qualities of happiness is permanence, that you have a permanent possession of what you have. If you have fear of losing it, you're not really happy. So you buy a house on the edge of Florida and, well, maybe the hurricane's going to come and wash it away, which is very possible, right? You have a fear. You see, that's not happiness. You might be drawn out into the ocean or something. That can happen. So it has to have permanence. If you're going to lose it, you're not happy. If you have fear of losing it, you're not happy. So the second reason is transitory. Third, he says, St. Thomas, because to seek a happy result from it is deceptive. See, so you're not going to. It is a deceiving thing. You see a certain aspect of good in it. You are never attracted to anything evil except under an aspect of good. Something is good about it. So gluttony. I weigh 500 pounds, but that piece of cake is delicious. See? In other words, it's bad for you, but there is an aspect about it that is good, and that is it tastes good. See? So there's always something good about something evil, at least a perceived good. See? Because the will cannot move toward anything that is perceived as evil. Your will is blind, just like think of an airplane through fog. If you've ever, where you're in the clouds, you can't see anything outside. The pilot can't see any more than you. He's going purely on what he's being told by his instruments, purely. And then the plane emerges from the clouds, and there's the runway. See? So the same is true of the will. The will is totally blind. It is fed information by the intellect. This is good. Go for it. You see, that's the intellect. And then the will moves. You see, so there's always the intellect has to perceive something good about the object, and it could be some cheap good, but it has to be good. See, if it isn't good in some way, you're repulsed by it. So it's deceptive. In other words, that the good is deceptive because it's intrinsically evil. The fat man is just going to get fatter as a result of eating that piece of cake. 4, because it bears no fruit. See that, and he quotes Isaiah chapter 49, verse 4. Isaiah 49, verse 4. He said, and I said, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength without cause and in vain. Therefore my judgment is with the Lord, and my work with my God. So St. Thomas cites that. Also, Prophet Jeremiah, chapter 2, verse 6. Chapter 2, verse 6. And They have not said, where is the Lord that made us come out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the desert, through a land uninhabited and unpassable, through a land of drought, and the image of death, through a land wherein no man walked, nor any man dwelt. And 17:6. For he shall be like tamarisk in the desert, and he shall not see when good shall come, but he shall dwell in dryness in the desert, in a salt land, and not inhabited. So that is the results of sin in Lamentations. The Lamentations are also of Jeremiah when he was left in Jerusalem after the destruction by Nebuchadnezzar, right? And they are read on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday Matins. That's Tenebrae, the Lamentations of Jeremiah. Right, so he stayed behind and just looked at Jerusalem completely destroyed, and that's why they're called the Lamentations. And then he talks about the sins of Jerusalem. See, so in 1:8 he says, Jerusalem has grievously sinned, therefore is she become unstable. All that honored her have despised her, because they have seen her shame, but she sighed and turned backward. See, the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, including the Temple of Solomon, which was magnificent, was the result of a long series of sins of infidelity on the part of Jews. So the prophet Isaiah and the prophet Jeremiah were both warning the Jews of their infidelity and that trouble was coming if you don't straighten out effectively. And so it did come in the form of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Chaldeans, and the temple everything was destroyed. They were led off to Babylon, which was the capital of the Chaldeans, and in what is now Iraq. And and there they were held in captivity and a servile state for 70 years. It's known as the Babylonian captivity. And that's where they, a number of interesting things. That's where they learned to write in the boxy letters of Hebrew, because the Chaldeans did. That was Chaldean. They used to write something like the ancient Greeks in sort of little lines and whatnot, squiggly things. But that's where the Hebrew came from, what you know is Hebrew today. They also lost their, many of them lost their lineage of what tribe they belonged to, and their language changed into Aramaic because it's a mixture of Chaldean and Hebrew. See, so we see that when our Lord said, "Lama, lama," I can't remember it. He said it in Hebrew. He quoted the Psalm, O Lord, why hast thou forsaken me?" He quoted the Psalm in Hebrew. And they said, he's calling Elias, Eli, Eli. Eli in Hebrew means my God. But they thought he was calling Elias, which means, and the Romans wouldn't have known that. I mean, they didn't, read Hebrew, forget it. But that means that the Pharisees and chief priests, etc., around him, or just Jews, let's say, because the priests would have known Hebrew. But the people around him said, oh, he's calling Elias. They didn't know Hebrew. Hebrew became a liturgical language for them by that point. So they commonly spoke Aramaic, and our Lord is presumed to have spoken Aramaic. He would not have had reason to speak Hebrew, because the common people didn't understand it. And but he quoted the Psalm in Hebrew, and they didn't recognize it, which is odd. I mean, in a sense of it. But the sign on top of the cross that Pilate wanted was in Hebrew, not Aramaic. So, which made it more universal and solemn. So anyway, that's oh no, gosh, terrible. Eli lama sabachthani. What was it? All right, we're talking about, as always, mortal sin. The first cause of the instability of the sinner is his estrangement from God. And the second cause is the natural instability of man, is that no creature, no passion, no pleasure can fulfill man's desires nor satisfy it. Only God can do this. The reason is that your immortal soul, endowed with intellect and will, is only pleased ultimately by invisible things. See, a material thing can only please you in a very limited way, and you exhaust its ability to please you very, very quickly. Because, as St. Augustine said, our hearts were made for thee, and they will not rest until they rest in thee. See, so as I think I said earlier, the people are much more interested in love, for example, than they are in nice cars. What are all the popular songs about? Who loves me or who doesn't love me? You see, and all of the operas and love is an immaterial thing. It's an act of the will. The will is immaterial. You can see material effects of love, such as people might give you gifts or in some way care for you or something. Those are effects. Those are material effects, but that proceeds from something that is interior. And if it doesn't proceed from something interior, it is a sham. So for example, if an adulterous husband should bring his wife flowers on her birthday, she'll throw them down because those are manifestative normally of a true love. And she, get out of here, because they are not manifestative of the interior act of love. See, so also intellectual things such as music, art, etc., things that are appreciated only by the intellect, are the things that really make human beings happy, and ultimately God. The soul is made to know God. That's why you have an intellect, to know God. And any creature that should be in some way a bridge to God. So that's something to understand, that the human beings are consoled. They're consoled by justice. They're consoled by many other intellectual things, invisible things. You see acts of justice, but justice is an interior virtue that is immaterial. See? As I said, there's no courts of law among the lions and tigers in Africa. It's just whoever gets to the gazelle first. See? So that's so only God can really please the soul. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux said, "The rational soul can be occupied by every other thing, but it cannot be completely filled except by God." So when people are godless, they attempt to fill their souls with all sorts of external things, which just will not do the job in the long term. They might be, yes, distracted or happy with it for a certain amount of time, but it loses all of its attraction very shortly. The third reason for the instability of the sinner is that those things which he pursues by his carnal desire are fluctuating, fleeting, and mixed with much bitterness and torment, and in where they lead and in when they are lost. So people when they find out that they're not loved anymore by their girlfriend or boyfriend, or as the case may be, they will often commit suicide, because that is where they have placed their happiness. And if I don't have that love in my life, well, that's the end. There's no more reason for me to live. So there's a lot of bitterness in the separation from the things that they have made the object of their happiness. There's a lot of potential bitterness and sadness, that they've made this their paradise, and then, well, things happen. People die, or they might get sued, or there's an earthquake. There were 60 people who today died in the Philippines because of an earthquake. They woke up in the morning thinking everything was fine, and then they're dead by the end of the day. See, there's all sorts of ways in which our temporal happiness can perish. See, and so so that's a reason for the instability of the sinner. The fourth cause of his instability is that one vice leads to another. So once you set your mind on the things of this world as the source of your happiness, which is the essence of mortal sin, then all sorts of vices come up, because you have avarice, you have laziness, you have all sorts of dissipation, you might have drunkenness, you might take drugs, you might do all sorts of kinds of things that in some way please you, and so just stealing, for example, adultery, all kinds of vices. The fifth cause of instability is that is that the remorse of conscience does not permit the sinner to have a moment of peace. So this is why Cain became a vagabond. The conscience is constantly reproaching you, and a sinner is constantly reproached by his conscience. See, and he cannot get out from under it, that he's doing something wrong, and he's not right, even in a natural sense. He's it's just something's deeply wrong. He's not at peace. So conscience has a way of barking at you, even during your whole life, for past sins and everything. The conscience is always there. You can't buy with all the gold in the world the testimony of a clear conscience. The sixth cause of instability is that the sinner is agitated by many evil desires, to such an extent that St. Ambrose says that sin can be regarded as a fire out of control and a burning fever of the soul. So one desire ignites another desire. And you see that in hardened sinners. I mean, they're capable of all kinds of sins. Once they are on the path of mortal sin, they're capable of all kinds of sins. So one vice creates another vice. And the seventh cause of the instability of the sinner is that the soul loses its virginity, that is, its innocence, its original innocence from baptism, and becomes a prostitute. That is, it sells itself to evil things. It therefore searches everywhere, deceiving itself. In other words, it searches everywhere for some sort of cheap fulfillment, and it's therefore unstable in that way. So mortal sin destroys sanctifying grace in the soul, which is the most precious of treasures. God communicates himself to the soul by means of sanctifying grace. So It is a participation in the divine life, as you know. So it's God cannot communicate himself, strictly speaking. It'd be impossible that he'd communicate himself to a creature. But apart from the hypostatic union, but even there, our Lord's human nature remained human, as he cannot make a human being himself in that sense, against his essence. But he does give us a participation in his life. It's something like a millionaire inviting an urchin on the street to come in and live in his palace. You can live here and partake in my kind of life. So it's something like that. So in a certain sense, he transforms the soul into himself, in a certain sense, and divinizes it. So it is a very, very precious gift. And you see that in the saints. You see that life of God in the saints. That's all they live for. That's all and they do extraordinary things from the point of view of piety and holiness and mortification, etc. When God descends into a soul by the light of grace, the soul melts like wax near a fire, and it weeps over its sins. It is set on fire. It becomes meek and cares only for the glory of God. So that's the natural tendency of sanctifying grace, is to care only for the glory of God. So pride, ambition, and vanity disappear, as well as cowardice, fear, lukewarmness, and laziness. So sanctifying grace is always going to urge the soul to do something in conformity with the glory of God, and wipes away the vices. Now, you might have vestiges of the vices, but the grace is going to urge over and above those vices. In other words, it's going to for example, to make girls like St. Agnes face martyrdom. I mean, naturally, a woman would be more given to fear than a man, say, naturally. But, they went to their martyrdoms, and as I think she was a teenager. So it enables the soul to do extraordinary things from the point of view of the glory of God. And sanctifying grace makes all of our good works meritorious. Remember the eating of ice cream, for example. It's meritorious. It's all the Dominicans say all good works done in the state of sanctifying grace are meritorious. So that means it's the principle of merit. And it's something like the example would be getting hired to mow someone's lawn. You have a principle of merit there. Yes, please mow the lawn. I'll pay you such and such to mow the lawn. You have a principle of merit. You mow the lawn. You go to the knock on the door and say, mow the lawn. Now please pay me. You have a principle of merit. If you don't get hired, you have no principle of merit. You can mow the lawn and say, please pay me, and they could shut the door. So you have no principle of merit. So sanctifying grace is the principle of merit. And that's why any good act done in the state of sanctifying grace is meritorious, including the eating of ice cream, provided it's not gluttonous. See, I don't think you have a birthday cake today. Today is Father Esposito's birthday, so you get a birthday cake. All right, so so that's meritorious, but all merit the degree of merit is based on effort. So being martyred, for example, is far more meritorious than eating a bowl of ice cream. So that's off the scales. Being martyred is the highest form of merit you could possibly do. So grace, first of all, expels all mortal sin. 2, it renders man pleasing to God. So because you have the nature of God, a participation in the nature of God in yourself, so you're pleasing to God. And this is against Protestantism. For Protestantism, we're all sinners. See, we remain sinners, and all we need to do is have faith, that is confidence in God, and God forgets about our sins. He looks only at the merits of Christ. He covers us with the merits of Christ. That's the Protestant idea. So the idea of of sanctifying grace and your soul pleasing to God is completely alien to Protestantism, which had the effect of leveling European society in the Protestant countries. They turned to mercantilism, this world, because you can't. All you can do is believe in God. You're a sinner, so all you do is believe, and therefore there's no idea of spiritual perfection or of another worldliness. You see that like in religious life, for example, it just leveled European society, and that's why you see in Protestant countries the death of any kind of how would you say elevating art. For example, in Holland, you see the great artists painting landscapes. That's typical, or people looking out the window, or just banal things, beautiful paintings, but banal things. Whereas art in the Middle Ages was nearly always religious. Very seldom do you have a non-religious theme in the Middle Ages. People were fixed on the next world in the Middle Ages, and monasteries were filled, and religious life, etc. And what do we have from the Middle Ages? Do we have rocket ships? Do we have computers? They were just as bright as we are. They could have produced those things if they wanted to. But what do we have? We have a Gregorian chant and cathedrals. That's it. What else? They still used ox carts. Everything was primitive from our point of view, but they had all of their energy was towards supernatural things. Protestantism leveled that, so it just blew it up, and then the turn was to material things. And that's where you had mercantilism and building up of money. And as I always say, in England, there's two things to see. Before the Reformation, there's all their cathedrals, which are magnificent. After the Reformation is to see their beautiful houses that they lived in. All those magnificent, like what you saw in that stupid show, I forget its name, Downton Abbey. That's Highclere, which is one of the biggest houses in England, but that's you see, you go around to the houses. Oh, this is a beautiful house that some rich man lived in. That's it. So there's really virtually nothing left after the Reformation in those countries. And also Denmark and the Scandinavian countries are pretty blah, from the point of view of architecture and art after the Reformation. Here and there, there's an example. France, after the Revolution, didn't produce much. Nothing much to look at. Practically 95% of what you would want to go look at in France is from before the Revolution, which is its type of revolt against the church. Same in Italy, same in Spain. It's that's the effect of sanctifying grace, but the effect of the idea that you're in sin just turns you to this world. So sanctifying grace establishes rectitude and holiness in the soul, its will, and in its mind, and in all of the faculties. They are all submitted to God. So it has a wonderful effect. Fourth, we become adoptive sons of God and co-heirs and members of Christ, as St. Paul says. It brings with it all of the virtues and the 7 gifts of the Holy Ghost. So all of the natural virtues are elevated, the cardinal virtues, and then the infused virtues, faith, hope, and charity, those are infused. And so the whole edifice, you might say, of activity is raised to a supernatural level. So all of your motive of natural virtue becomes supernatural. You see. Your fortitude is motivated by charity being love of God, and that is the motor that runs all of the rest of the virtues. Just like the jet engines run everything on the plane, all the air conditioning, everything, that runs everything. Just think of that. Always transportation, but all of the systems on the airplane are run by those engines. And charity runs the whole edifice of the virtues. You should learn that in ascetical and mystical theology, which you just had. It also gives us the assurance of the possession of heaven. So you have you cannot know for sure that you are predestined. You have certain signs of predestination. Some signs, there are signs of predestination, but it's a dogma of faith that you cannot know that for certain. So you can't say, I'm saved. But you can have a moral certitude in the sense that you have a good conscience, and you're not conscious of any mortal sin, and that you're leading a life in accordance with the law of God, etc. That would give you a type of moral certitude. That means not an absolute certitude, but a moral certitude, a hope, a founded hope of salvation. It also is the principle and cause of satisfaction for sins committed. You see, so it's important to make up for sins committed in the past, and that is the principle of satisfaction for them. See, the state of sanctifying grace. So if you fall back into mortal sin, you can't satisfy for past sins. You don't have any title to satisfaction. But if you're in the state of sanctifying grace, you can do that. You see? And the sanctifying grace also preserves us from committing these sins again, and also urges us to avoid the occasions of them. See, so that's to understand sanctifying grace, and mortal sin blows that up, all of that. And grace has as its first fruit peace of soul, peace of mind, which is a very important thing. People do these horrible things like shooting up people, and because they have no interior peace. It also gives us hope of eternal glory. It confers rectitude and holiness. That is, the will, the mind, and the other faculties are submitted to God and to his law, and makes man similar to God, as Adam was similar to God before his fall. So it's the restoration of the principal gift of God to Adam, not of the preternatural gifts, which was freedom from suffering, freedom from death, freedom from concupiscence. It does not restore those, but it does restore the principal gift of God to Adam. See, so it makes us adoptive sons of God, which we said. It brings, yes, we said all that. The only thing that can destroy it is a mortal sin. Mortal sin transforms the soul from being, oh gosh, is it already done? Just got started. All right. In the Book of Wisdom, it says, we're talking about mortal sin. In the Book of Wisdom, it says, for wisdom will not enter into a malicious soul, nor dwell in a body subject to sins. For the Holy Spirit of discipline will flee from the deceitful, and will withdraw himself the thoughts that are without understanding. He shall not abide when iniquity cometh in. So if wisdom dominates the soul, which is free of mortal sin, and governs it, then foolishness directs the man who abandons himself to sin. So wisdom is the gift that corresponds to charity, the virtue of charity. Wisdom is to see things as God sees them. It's the short definition of the gift of wisdom, one of the 7 gifts of the Holy Ghost, and the highest of them. Imagine someone who has lived his whole life in the state of grace and has achieved the state of perfection, A single mortal sin takes away all of the merit of his prayers, all of his mortifications, all of his fasting, all of his charitable donations, all of his confessions and communions. All of it is destroyed by a single mortal sin. Merit for all of those things, all your good acts, it's all destroyed. It'd be something like when the 1929 crash of the stock market came, there were people that opened the windows of the buildings in New York and jumped out because they lost everything. They were rich people, and then they had nothing all of a sudden because the whole market crashed. It's something like that. And they died. It was quite common. There were bodies on the ground in Wall Street. So if a man were to die in this state, nothing of these meritorious acts would be counted. He would be excluded from heaven and condemned to hell. Now, theologians say that these things are restored when you are restored to the state of grace through the sacrament of penance. But it's not certain, actually. It's common teaching of theologians. In Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 20, we read, "If the just man shall turn away from his justice and shall commit iniquity, I will lay a stumbling block before him. He shall die in his sins, and his justices which he hath done shall not be remembered." So, for example, if you had a habit of mortal sin, yet did charitable things, something like mafia people, they do horror. They sponsor prostitution. They practice extortion, etc. But they organize parties block parties for the kids. It's very typical. Or they'll offer to give a statue to the church. Doesn't count. If you love sin, none of those things count at all as far as there's no merit in those things if you're in sin. All of the good which man does in mortal sin is lost with regard to heaven and will not be rewarded. There is absolutely no merit to be gained for as long as man remains in the state of mortal sin, because the principle of merit is gone. The principle of merit is sanctifying grace. Just as the principle of your being paid is that you're hired. And if you go and do some good work, but you haven't been hired, nobody owes you anything. So sanctifying grace is an absolute condition for merit. In the Apocalypse we read, "Because thou sayest, I am rich and made wealthy, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked." The person in the state of mortal sin should not despair, but should pray and fast in order to receive the grace of contrition and repentance. While it is true that good works done in the state of mortal sin are not meritorious, they nonetheless dispose the sinner to convert and to obtain mercy. See, so you don't merit at all in this state of mortal sin. So those good works are not revived by contrition. Those what are revived are things that you did that were truly meritorious before your mortal sin. But afterwards, what you do in the state of mortal sin, that's not meritorious at all. That's not revived in any way. These good works could be a remote disposition. And I say remote disposition because Contrition is something that is the effect of actual grace, and something natural cannot be a disposition, strictly speaking, to something supernatural. It's a general principle, right? However, it could alert you to good works, and therefore alert you to the need for repentance, but you need to pray for it and to go back to God in a supernatural way. Merit requires the state of grace, but lost through the state of mortal sin are vivified, as I said, after the restoration of the soul to the state of grace through contrition and confession. The Holy Fathers of the Church taught this, and theologians. So it's generally admitted. When the soul leaves the body now a cadaver, is deprived of life and becomes vile, disgusting, putrid, and stinking. So a dead body starts to stink very quickly. If it is not embalmed, it goes downhill very, very quickly. And that's why Martha said, I think it was Martha said, that Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days, I think it is, and he stinketh. See, which was even better for the miracle that he had not been placed there, just the day before, and maybe he was still alive, but it was better for the miracle because everybody knew he was dead for that many days and not embalmed, and he would have been just, even his closest relatives could not look at him. And he came out of the tomb, and that was the miracle, the greatest of Christ's miracles, and prefigured the resurrection from the dead. It was only a few days before he went to Jerusalem to die. So, and it was performed just outside of Jerusalem, and in front of a lot of people who had come to see Martha and Mary, to console them over the death of their brother. So there were a lot of people there from Jerusalem, and they went back to Jerusalem and said, what happened? See, and that's when the Pharisees started to say, we have to kill him. Pharisees and chief priests. So, so it becomes horrible. The same is true analogically for the soul which has lost its principle of supernatural life, which is sanctifying grace. So by analogy, although you can't see the soul, the same sort of putrefaction occurs. It's incapable of any kind of supernatural act, and all it becomes is really something that, something like the soul of an animal. In other words, it's just keeping your body alive. But any kind of supernatural activity is completely cut off. So what the soul is to the body, so is God to the soul. As the soul is the life of the body, grace is the life of the soul. So the reason for that is that the soul is, by nature, is meant to know through the intellect immaterial things. And as I said in another conference, what people crave most are immaterial things. See, they love, justice, fortitude, you name all the virtues, they're all immaterial in the sense that they proceed from an immaterial principle. See? And they might show material effects, but they proceed from an immaterial principle. Courage, for example. So the soul becomes incapable of producing any kind of supernatural act. It can produce natural acts, obviously, but it cannot produce a supernatural act. Why is that? Why is God the life of the soul? Because God is the author of all of those immaterial things. In other words, a dog or a cat cannot aspire to immaterial things, doesn't know anything immaterial. Because you want immaterial things, you implicitly want to see God, because he is all of those things by nature. He is justice. He is holiness. He is everything. He is fortitude, everything that pertains to any kind of perfection that pertains to human beings and which they admire pertains to God essentially. So there is the life of the soul depends on the life of God in the soul. The life of God in the soul is sanctifying grace. It is impossible for God to actually inhabit our soul, because if he did, it would be something like putting the sun in your pocket. All right, you know what would happen. If that were possible, of the energy and fire of the sun, putting that in your pocket, and that's not even. God exceeds the sun, infinitely, so he cannot inhabit something that is finite in that sense. He can't, but through his grace, he can give to the soul a supernatural life that permits it to proceed toward the beatific vision by loving immaterial things in this life in a supernatural way. See, and loving God by obeying his laws. See, that's the life of the soul. In that sense, it is. It doesn't mean that your natural life it depends on that, because you could commit 1,000 mortal sins and not die. The natural life of the soul is to keep the body going. See, all the eating and drinking and all of the things that you do, digestion and whatnot. That's the natural life of the soul, but there's a supernatural life which corresponds to the immateriality of the soul. Because again, cats and dogs have souls. They have a life principle. Anything that moves on its own has a life principle. Call it what you want. A soul, a life principle. Plants have a life principle. Anything that moves itself, self-movement is the principle of life, or the sign of life, I should say. And its principle of life is whatever you want to call it. You see, but the souls of animals are dependent upon their bodies. So when the animal dies, the soul dies with it, because it no longer has a purpose or a function. Everything they do is for some sort of temporal thing. See, its object is only temporal. But the human soul does not die because it has as its object immaterial things, and that's why you want to live forever. And that's why the soul survives the death of the body. So that's even available by reason. You could reason to that. You can't have a conversation with a cat or a dog. Well, maybe with a cat, but not with a dog. But you even with a gorilla, or you can't have a conversation, no matter how much they might approach human nature. So some of these very refined animals, you can't have a conversation with them. They cannot. If you talk to them about justice or mercy, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. See, so there is an essential difference between what animates an animal or a plant and what animates a human being. See, the human being is a combination of the animal and the angelic, a bizarre combination, you might say, of the animal. Angels are pure spirits, animals are material, and their souls are attached to their matter. But we have immortal souls like angels, but yet we have bodies like animals. And that's why there's a bit of a conflict. Before original sin, there was no conflict, because everything was totally under the control of reason and supernatural grace. So there was no rebellion of the senses or anything like that. Everything was under control. You had so much control over your lower nature, you might say, as you would say over a piece of electronic equipment. You turn it on, you turn it off, you turn the volume up, you turn the volume down. Whenever you want it, you have it. So that was the state of the preternatural gifts, and those were taken away by original sin. So a single mortal sin destroys all the virtues as well as all of the spiritual riches. We said that. It takes away obedience. It takes away love of God. It takes away happiness. innocence, and prevents a good death. St. Thomas Aquinas said to his sister, she said, "Thomas, what should I hope for most in life?" And he said, "A good death." Famous quote of St. Thomas Aquinas. So that's the most important thing, is that you die well. You could be a very hardened sinner and yet die well, and vice versa. You could be a person of great virtue and die badly. It's the finish line. And even if a horse is very slow along the way, if he puts the gas on at the end, he's going to win. See? So it takes away innocence. It closes the gates of heaven. It deprives us of eternal glory, of the vision of God and of the possession of God, and deprives us of joy for all eternity. It has a terrible, terrible effect, a single mortal sin. Mortal sin is like a thief which strips man of the most precious goods, the things which are most important for us. As I said earlier in one of my classes, the intellect is constantly seeking information. Constantly. That's why people are looking at their phones all the time, or their various devices. That's why they watch movies. That's why they want the news. What's the news? That's why they want to converse with other people for information, because the intellect has a dire need to be, it never stops. It wants to be fed information. It wants to know being. And so that is part of the death of hell. In other words, the pain of hell is that is all cut off. All it is in the equivalent of sitting in a prison where nothing is there's no desirable information, you might say. Just the person next to you hates you as much as you hate him. There's no love in hell. It's full of hate, and everybody hates God. Everybody blames God for why they're there. So it's constant blasphemy, and I'm convinced that it's rock music too, non-stop rock music. I'm convinced of it. So, St. Augustine said, "The excellence and good of human nature is evident especially in that it has been given to him the power to attach itself to the nature of the supreme and unshakable good," meaning God. "If it should refuse it, it becomes deprived of the absolute good." So all the created goods that you seek in this life you have an attraction to the good in general. So any created good, even dessert, let's say ice cream. Well, you probably get a cake today because it's Father's birthday. That good is a reflection of the divine good, but the will is fixed on the universal good. So even when you commit a sin, there is some aspect of good in it. Otherwise, you would not be attracted to it. The will is inevitably attracted to the good, and so that is so it is therefore attracted to God, because God is the supreme good. So that's what's cut off in mortal sin. See? And this is St. Augustine, and this is its supreme misfortune. For by the justice of God, man's nature falls rapidly into suffering and ignominy. What can be more awful and worthy of contempt than to try and find the good in the abandonment of the true and the good? Sometimes one does not feel the evil of the loss of the higher good when one possesses the inferior good which one loves. So somebody who's involved in a lot of sin. But it pertains to the justice of God that he who, by his own will, loses that which he should love, that is God, loses as well the sorrow for what he had loved. In other words, you lose all of your attachments to the things of this world. There's nothing left to love. That's hell. I think we'll stop there. You don't say for yourself, well, you know, the ice cream was good. All of that is gone. All you have is evil. It's scary.